This is a Tesla Model Y. It's one of the most common electric cars on the road right now, and it's also one of the first cars that can technically drive itself. Kind of. It has a feature called Full Self-Driving, or FSD, which sounds futuristic, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But here's the question we're asking today. Are self-driving cars actually safer than humans? Or have we been sold a $15,000 software dream that's still learning how to stay in its lane? Now, before we start arguing one way or another, let me show you something. About 2 weeks ago, a brand new Tesla Model 3 rear-ended a stationary truck on a California highway. The driver told police they had Autopilot engaged. The car didn't slow down. The driver assumed it would. It didn't. A week before that, a Waymo self-driving taxi in Arizona got stuck at a four-way intersection, blocking traffic for 5 minutes straight. No driver inside, no steering wheel, just a confused robot on a busy street. And a few months ago, Cruise, that's General Motors' self-driving division, had its operating license suspended in California after one of its cars dragged a pedestrian after an accident. These aren't small random incidents. These are red flags in an industry that keeps telling us machines are better drivers than we are. So today I'm going to take you through what's really going on. The hype, the numbers, the truth about whether self-driving cars are actually safer, or whether we're just test subjects in a billion-dollar beta test. If you like videos that dig into the facts, not just the flashy marketing, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and it tells YouTube you actually want to see more content like this. Thanks in advance. All right, let's start with something simple. When companies like Tesla, Waymo, and Cruise talk about safety, they love to use big, confident numbers. Tesla, for instance, has claimed for years that cars using autopilot crash less frequently than those driven by humans. They'll post quarterly safety reports showing that one crash occurs every 7 million miles on autopilot, compared to one crash every 500,000 miles for average drivers. That sounds impressive, right? Like statistically bulletproof. But those numbers come from Tesla itself, not from independent regulators. And even more importantly, they don't separate how the cars are being driven. Because most autopilot use happens on highways, where crash rates are already much lower than in the city. It's kind of like saying, my autopilot car is safer than humans, but only comparing it to people driving through downtown Los Angeles at rush hour. See where the trick is? The reality is, we still don't have reliable third-party data proving that self-driving cars, even partial ones, are consistently safer than human drivers across all conditions. And that's what makes 2025 such an interesting year for this discussion. Because right now, every major automaker and tech company is fighting to prove that their system, their sensors, their AI, their cameras, is the one that finally solves autonomy. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what that actually looks like in the real world. We'll look at a few real self-driving vehicles, talk about what's going right, what's going wrong, and ultimately what no one wants to admit about this whole safety argument. Let's get into it. All right, let's start here. What does safer actually mean when it comes to self-driving cars? Because when you hear that phrase, you probably imagine fewer crashes, fewer deaths, fewer mistakes. Simple. But to the companies building these systems, safer doesn't always mean safe. It just means better than before. Or more accurately, better than the average distracted human driver in very specific conditions. Let me give you an example. When Tesla releases its quarterly safety reports, they'll proudly say something like, in Q1 of 2024, we recorded one crash for every 7.1 million miles driven using autopilot. And that sounds incredible until you read the fine print. That number only applies while autopilot was active, mostly on highways, mostly in clear weather, mostly by owners who paid attention. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, estimates the average driver in America gets into one crash about every 500,000 miles. But that includes every type of driver. Drunk drivers, sleepy drivers, brand new teenage drivers, and people in snowstorms. So Tesla's comparison isn't apples to apples. It's more like apples to motorized oranges. But here's the part most people don't know. In 2023, the NHTSA quietly released data showing over 900 crashes involving vehicles with driver assistance systems like Tesla's Autopilot, Ford Blue Cruise, and GM Super Cruise. And guess which brand topped the list? Tesla, by a massive margin. Now, that doesn't automatically mean Tesla's system is the most dangerous. It also means they have more cars on the road collecting data. But it does show something important. Self-driving tech isn't immune to accidents. The same trend showed up when you look at Waymo, Google's self-driving division. Waymo's cars drive fully autonomously in a few US cities, like Phoenix and San Francisco. They're careful, slow, and precise. They obey every rule, they don't speed, and they'll even stop for a squirrel in the road. But that doesn't mean they're perfect.
In early 2025, one Waymo car in Phoenix froze in the middle of a narrow lane, literally couldn't decide what to do, and blocked traffic until a human operator remotely intervened. Another one scraped against a truck while trying to merge. No injuries, thankfully, but imagine that happening during rush hour, hundreds of cars backed up, horns blaring, all because a computer saw too many possibilities and couldn't make up its mind. That's the heart of the problem. Human drivers make emotional mistakes. We get angry, we get tired, we get distracted. AI drivers make logical mistakes. They misinterpret reality. They see reflections, road cones, plastic bags, and misclassify them as threats or ignore them entirely. When a human driver sees a flashing light or a hand wave from a cop directing traffic, we instantly know what to do. But an AI system, unless that exact gesture has been labeled, trained, and tested thousands of times, it might just freeze, or worse, do something unpredictable. In other words, AI doesn't understand context. It just predicts patterns. That's why when a Tesla hits a stopped fire truck, or when a Waymo drives into wet paint thinking it's a solid road, the engineers call it an edge case. But to the people in those cars, that's not an edge case. That's life or death. Now let's talk about Cruise, GM's robotaxi company. They had big ambitions in 2023, fully driverless cars running in San Francisco, Austin, and Phoenix. No steering wheel, no pedals, just sensors and silence. But it didn't last. In late 2023, one of their cars accidentally trapped and dragged a pedestrian after another driver hit her. It was horrifying, and it completely changed the conversation around autonomy. California regulators immediately suspended Cruise's operating license, and GM had to pull every car off the road. That was the moment a lot of people realized self-driving isn't just a cool tech demo anymore. It's a real responsibility. And that brings us to 2025. The technology has come a long way. Faster computers, better cameras, smarter AI models. But trust? That's harder to earn back. Because for every successful self-driving trip that ends safely, there's still a tiny chance something could go wrong. And that risk, even if it's 1 in a million, feels unacceptable when it's your family in the car. So when companies say self-driving is safer, it's worth asking, safer for who? The passenger? The pedestrian? The company's public image? We'll get to that. But first, I want to show you how these systems actually work, because understanding how they drive is key to understanding why they fail. Let's head to that next. So, let's pull back the curtain. What's actually happening when a car drives itself? From the outside, it looks simple. You tap a button, the wheel turns by itself, and the car magically knows what to do. But behind the scenes, there's an entire digital brain working in overdrive, processing millions of data points every second, just to keep you between two white lines. Here's the basic idea. A self-driving system is built on 3 pillars: perception, prediction, and planning. 1. Perception, seeing the world. This is where the car's sensors come in. Most modern autonomous cars use a mix of cameras, radar, and LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Cameras act like eyes. They see color, light, and shapes. Radar measures distance and movement, even through fog or rain. LiDAR paints a 3D picture of the environment using laser pulses. Think of it like echolocation, but with light. All that raw data, millions of points per second, gets fed into an onboard computer running advanced AI models. The computer's job is to figure out what it's looking at. Is that a human crossing the street, a shadow, a trash bag, a sign that's bent or covered in graffiti? And that's where the first cracks appear. Because AI doesn't actually see, it recognizes patterns. If it's seen thousands of examples of stop signs during training, it'll probably recognize one in the real world. But if the sign is faded, has stickers on it, or someone turned it slightly, it might not. That's why in 2019, a team of researchers showed they could fool a Tesla by simply putting a few pieces of black tape on a 35-mile-per-hour speed limit sign. The car read it as 85 miles per hour. No hacking, no software breach, just tape. Now, imagine what that means when you scale it up to 1 million vehicles. 2. Prediction, guessing what happens next. Once the car identifies what it's around it, cars, pedestrians, cyclists, road cones, it has to predict what each of those things will do next. If you're a human driver, you do this instinctively. You see a kid chasing a ball near the sidewalk, and your brain instantly says, "Slow down, that kid might run into the street." AI has to learn that through data. And that's tough, because human behavior isn't math. It's emotional, irrational, unpredictable. Waymo, for example, has built massive machine learning models trained on billions of driving scenarios. Their cars can guess whether a pedestrian will wait or cross, whether a merging car will yield or cut in. But there's always uncertainty. A pedestrian makes eye contact with a human driver, that's communication. An AI doesn't understand eye contact. It doesn't feel hesitation, aggression, or courtesy.
That's why in some cases, self-driving cars will just stop and wait forever because they can't confidently predict what's about to happen. It's not fear, it's probability paralysis. 3. Planning, deciding what to do. Finally, once the system knows what's around it and what might happen next, it needs to plan its move. Should it brake, accelerate, change lanes, wait? Every decision has to balance safety, comfort, and traffic flow, all in milliseconds. If it overreacts, it slams the brakes. If it underreacts, it hits something. And here's the terrifying part. The AI doesn't always know when it's wrong. That's why most self-driving systems aren't actually fully autonomous. They're what the industry calls Level 2 or Level 3, which means they still rely on a human to monitor the road and take over if something goes wrong. But humans aren't good at almost driving. When you're told to sit and watch but not touch the wheel unless there's an emergency, your attention drifts. And when something does go wrong, you have less than a second to react. That's why several Tesla crashes involved drivers who didn't have their hands on the wheel. Not because they were reckless, but because the system's design invites trust that it hasn't fully earned. So yes, AI can technically see better than humans. It has 360 degrees vision, faster reaction time, and zero fatigue. But what it lacks is understanding. It can detect a pedestrian, but not know if they're running for the bus or chasing a dog. It can follow the rules perfectly and still cause chaos in situations where humans rely on instinct, not logic. Because driving isn't just about seeing and reacting. It's about interpreting the world. And no matter how powerful the AI becomes, that human intuition is still missing. So here's where things get messy. Let's say a self-driving car crashes. No drunk driver, no texting teenager, just a machine making a bad call. Who's responsible? The answer depends on who you ask. The driver says the car was in control. The company says the driver should have been paying attention. And the law, well, the law hasn't quite caught up yet. 1. The blame game. When a Tesla on Autopilot plows into a parked truck, the headlines usually focus on the driver. He ignored warnings, he took his hands off the wheel, he trusted the system too much. And yes, technically Tesla's fine print says autopilot requires active supervision. But here's the contradiction. The company also markets it with names like full self-driving and autopilot. That's like selling a life jacket called shark-proof armor and then blaming the user for getting bitten. The truth is, most drivers don't fully understand the limitations of these systems. They're told the car can steer, brake, and change lanes on its own. So when the system fails, it's not just user error, it's a design failure. Because we're being asked to do something we're terrible at. Stay alert while doing nothing. 2. The liability vacuum. Now let's imagine something worse. A fatal accident involving a fully autonomous car, like a Waymo or cruise vehicle with no steering wheel, no pedals, and no human driver. When that car messes up, who do you sue? The owner? The passenger? The software engineer who wrote the code? The company that built the sensors? Legally, it's a black hole. Right now, most countries don't have a clear framework for this. In the US, it's handled case by case, meaning one crash in Arizona might have a totally different legal outcome than one in California. In 2024, a self-driving Uber test vehicle killed a pedestrian in Tempe, Arizona. The backup driver, who was supposed to monitor the system, was charged with negligent homicide. Uber, the company, faced no criminal charges. Think about that. A billion-dollar corporation builds a machine that kills someone, and the only person held accountable is the one sitting there watching the machine do it. 3. The invisible hand of data. Here's another uncomfortable truth. When a crash happens, the data, the black box of self-driving, belongs to the company. That means the same people who designed the system also control the evidence about what went wrong. It's like letting a suspect write their own police report. In several Tesla crash investigations, regulators had to ask Tesla for crash logs, and Tesla decided what to share. That makes transparency almost impossible, because when data becomes corporate property, the truth becomes optional. 4. The ethical dilemma. And then there's the moral side, the question no one really wants to answer. Imagine a self-driving car faced with a no-win situation. A child runs into the road, and the only options are to swerve into oncoming traffic or hit the child. What should the AI do? And who gets to decide? Engineers? Lawmakers? You. This isn't hypothetical. These are the kinds of moral trade-offs being programmed into vehicles right now. Most companies avoid the topic publicly, but inside labs, they call it the trolley problem, a philosophical question from the 1960s that's suddenly become terrifyingly real. Because once a machine starts making life and death choices, it stops being just a tool. It becomes a participant in ethics. And that's something humanity has never faced before. 5. The human factor. Here's the paradox. The more advanced these systems get, the more we trust them, and the less prepared we are when they fail. And that's the core of the control problem. We're not just handing over the wheel, we're handing over judgment. And the moment that happens, responsibility becomes blurry. You can't sue an algorithm for negligence. You can't cross-examine a neural network in court. You can't put artificial intelligence on the witness stand. At least, not yet. 6. The road ahead. So where does that leave us in 2025? The dream of self-driving cars is still alive, but it's no longer the utopian fantasy Silicon Valley promised. Now it's a cautious negotiation between innovation and accountability. Tesla is still testing full self-driving in beta. Waymo's cars are expanding, slowly and carefully. Cruise is trying to rebuild its image after its shutdown. Progress is happening, but at a human pace, not a machine one. Because as it turns out, the hardest part of building a self-driving car isn't the sensors or the AI. It's figuring out what happens when things go wrong and deciding who's left holding the wheel. So maybe self-driving was never really about the car driving itself. Maybe it was about teaching us what driving and being human really means. Because no matter how advanced the algorithms get, the roads will always need something AI can't replicate: judgment, compassion, responsibility. And until the machines can feel those things, the wheel is still ours.
If you found this breakdown eye-opening, you're exactly who this channel is for. At AutoFix Secrets, we dig past the headlines, uncovering the stories car companies don't want you to see, and the truths buried under the hood of modern technology. Because cars aren't just machines, they're reflections of us, our trust, and our mistakes. If that's the kind of honesty you want more of, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the community that looks deeper. This isn't just about cars anymore. It's about what happens when we let them think for us.